Know that the Lord is with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
This is how the birth of Jesus came about. When his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found with child through the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, since he was a righteous man, yet unwilling to expose her to shame, decided to divorce her quietly. Such was his intention when, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary your wife into your home, for it is through the Holy Spirit that this child has been conceived in her. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and took his wife into his home. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
A father calls his son and tells his son that, listen, and unfortunately, your mother and I are not getting along. We've been fighting a lot, and we've decided we're just going to get a divorce. And he goes, listen, I want you to call your sister and tell her that, what's going on. So the son calls his sister and says, look, Mom, it's ridiculous. Mommy and Daddy are going to get a divorce. And says there's no talking them out of it. So then the sister calls up her father and says, this is ridiculous. What the heck are you guys talking about? You've been loving each other for almost 50 years, and now you guys are going to get a divorce? Don't do anything. Don't sign any papers. Don't call a lawyer. Don't do anything until we get there. We're flying in tomorrow. So the father says to his wife, she goes, well, she says, how did it go? He goes, like, perfectly. They're both coming in for Christmas. And they're both going to pay their own airfare. So, Paul Harvey, you've ever heard of Paul Harvey, the rest of the story? Right? So Paul Harvey tells a story that in 1938, there's a guy by the name of Philip Van Duren Stern, who, while he was shaving one day, comes up with the idea for this story. And he comes up with the entire story while he's shaving, 1938. But then another year goes by, he doesn't even write down the story. And finally he writes it down, and then he doesn't even try to sell it for 4 more years. And then he goes to try to sell it, and finally Cary Grant, the actor, had read the story, and thought, oh, maybe I could play this part. And so he talks RKO Studios into buying the story. So they buy the story, but then they couldn't really find a writer who could take the story and turn it into a screenplay. So they wind up selling it to a new startup company called Liberty Films, who was run and operated by a man by the Frank Capra. And Frank Capra took it on and developed it, produced it, they wrote a screenplay for it. And he changed the name of the story to the movie and called it The Greatest Gift was the name of the story, but he changed the name of the story to It's a Wonderful Life. And interestingly enough, it didn't really have a lot of fanfare. It came out in 1946, and nobody got nominated for an Academy Award, so the movie just kind of came and went, no big deal. How many of you have seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Right? Is there anybody who hasn't seen it? Okay, because I do want you to know there's 2 requirements here at Good Shepherd. 1, you have to believe in Jesus Christ is risen from the dead and is in your heart. And you have to watch It's a Wonderful Life every year. So we know the story of George Bailey, right? George Bailey he's a good guy, right? He's constantly thwarted in his ambition. He wants to go out and build skyscrapers and be an engineer and do all sorts of wonderful things. And one thing leads to another where he's kind of kept back. His dad passes away, and then Harry marries somebody, and he's going to go into something with in Buffalo, a company, and one thing leads to another where George, who wants to get out of this Bedford Falls, is constantly kept one thing after the other. And he's a good guy, right? He gives of himself. He values like people, and he has a family. He's married with 4 children. But there's always like a little thing there, a little gnawing at him. You know, Sam Rainwhite's off making like millions of dollars, and here he is making $40 an hour. So he's always a little bit bugged by it. You know, the car door, remember the car door never really opened. You had to like climb into the thing. And of course, we know Uncle Billy loses the $8,000 in the newspaper to Potter. You know? How could somebody be like Potter, right? I mean, just so greedy and nasty. You know, he knows he's got that money. And he just keeps it for himself and turns it around and twists it. There's always like that adversary in people's lives, like a Harry Potter, you know, or just that negative energy, the greediness. And so George goes into this despair, and he has this experience of what life would be like if he had never been born. And through this experience, something happens to George Bailey. He goes from living on the level of form, and while he's giving and loving, he still is living on that level of form, right? And he comes in, he's all freaked out over the whole thing. Remember, he goes in that little spindle ball, he goes, I'm taking it and throw it. You know, why do we have so many kids? Janie, stop playing Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and I'm not a dictionary fighting. How am I going to pay the doctor bill with Zuzu? So he's a good guy, but he is so bothered. So many things bother him when things don't go his way with that $8,000 that he's lost. All he can think about is he's done. He doesn't live in any possibility. He doesn't live in a sense of, wait a second here, there might be some other way of looking at this. So they're calling, they're praying, we got to pray to God. And they goes, oh, and interesting in the movie, God doesn't just like give George Bailey what he wants. God gives George Bailey an experience that changes George Bailey. And all of a sudden, he plunges into the depth to a deeper dimension of being human. And suddenly, nothing changed, and everything changed. Because George changed. George changed from inside of himself. And suddenly had the deepest appreciation for everything in his life. All the things saved Harry, and then, you know, here he is selling tire and rubber during World War II. But he didn't even realize that if it wasn't for him, Harry wouldn't have been around to save all those people on the transport. And Mr. Gower, who would have poisoned that kid and started to drink himself into oblivion and lost his dignity. And all of that was changed because of George Bailey. And all of a sudden, he has this like brand new way of looking at himself. And there's the miracle. And what happens was interesting when George changes the way he looks at things. He's hugging his kids, Zuzu's pillow, his mouth is bleeding, his car still stinks. But he was out that $8,000. And wasn't it amazing that when George changed, God not only found to give him what he needed, but he gave it to him in abundance. It was way beyond what he even needed. And he has that experience. The richest man in town isn't Potter or Sam Wainwright. The richest guy in town is George Bailey, who loves and gives and cares for people. The richness of that. But Paul Harvey goes on to say, there's the rest of the story. The the rest of the story was, because there was no fanfare with It's a Wonderful Life, 30 years go by, and in 1974, when the copyright was due to be signed, to be renewed, the license to be renewed, nobody bothered to do it at Liberty Films. And so what happened is, It's a Wonderful Life became a matter of public domain. And because it was a matter of public domain, that's why it was on TV for so many times at Christmas, all the different channels, because it was free. It was a matter of public domain. No one owns It's a Wonderful Life. And they estimate that had they signed and renewed the license for It's a Wonderful Life, it would have been worth $26 million a year to the film industry. And the cost to renew the license for the copyright was $4. And as Paul Harvey would say, that's the rest of the story. But isn't it kind of cool that now this beautiful film that now has become considered one of the top 10 films of all time has touched the lives of so many people. Every time I watch the freaking movie, I get emotional. George Bailey, the richest man in town. I can't handle it. It touches our lives. Isn't it amazing that the greatest gift of the original movie, the title, was that the thing was not renewed. The license wasn't renewed, and it's available to all of us. So here we are, the fourth Sunday of Advent. And we've gone through the first 3 weeks, right, where we're talking about, we can have it the first week, we're talking about being like negative and sort of not appreciating ourselves, and talking about that God created you deliberately, intentionally, and intelligently, and that you and I are here for a purpose, and that we're of immense value and importance. And there's a reason why we're all here. There's a reason why we're here today. And to come to a sense of looking at ourselves, taking a look at the things that have happened to us, where we've been hurt or wounded, and to look at those things so we can get on the other side of it and not let it run us with being hurt. A sense of acceptance. And then the next week we were talking about with the earth. Don't take yourself so seriously. Can you laugh at yourself? Let your heart be light. You know, we're so defensive, and we got to be recognized. And here we are on this little ball, letting everything bother us so often to lighten up. And then last week we were talking about a vibrational energy, like the dimension of who we are. Sometimes we don't even appreciate the depth of who we are. That we're emanating an energy. And that love is the highest energy. Isn't that interesting? That we are vibrating an energy, and the message of Jesus Christ in the gospel is love, which is the highest vibrational energy, and that when we operate from that, it actually helps our bodies. That there's actually like a healing component to our emotional state of being. And the highest is to love. And now we have this fourth Sunday of Advent where you see Joseph he's a little jammed up, right? He's like, what am I going to do here? And he has this experience, right? So like, when do we get it? We're bogged down. We're in a pickle. We don't know what to do. We got to make a decision, or there's a problem of how do we handle it? How do we deal with it? What do we do? Do we believe? Do we open ourselves up that there is going to be a guidance? There's going to be a grace. There is an intelligence beyond us, which also is within us and comes from our heart, Our heart is more intelligent than our mind, has more insight, and that if we can trust and let go of that, we're going to be guided into what is the best way to approach a situation, to trust, to surrender our lives to the living God. But it doesn't end on the fourth Sunday of Advent. There's the rest of the story. There is a rest of the story. Next week, there is the rest of the story. You got to come back. You got to come back and hear the rest of the story. Because the rest of the story is the most powerful event in human history. Now, I would like to tell you what happens, but I really got to hold off. Keep you like on the edge. There's a story. It's our story, and that story continues. It's a human story. But this human story brings in this deeper dimension into our lives. So powerful. Next week, the rest of the story, is transformational. And what makes the rest of the story, so powerful is that it's true.